education community of Northumberland, but we're here to represent the community rather than our individual roles. And a reminder that Schools Forum is a public meeting, it is recorded and it is made available for public viewing on YouTube. And I would like to start off by welcoming Steve Bird, who's joining us this morning for the first time as the Teaching Union rep, which I'll come back to later on. Okay, so if we can move on to the first item on the agenda, please, which is the membership and membership update. So that's over to you, Bruce.
Thanks, Alan. As I say, in terms of it's great news that we've been able to fill the teaching trade union representative on Schools Around Plus, and delighted to welcome Steve Bird to his first meeting in respect of that. Welcome, Steve. Anything you'd like to say in terms of an introduction, Steve, or so you're on mute, mind?
Yeah, it was a good start. Good morning, colleagues, and thanks for having me. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. We traditionally bring a review of Schools Forum membership to the September meeting, but I think anticipating that we will try to bring that forward to July, just to update membership ahead of the new academic year starting in September. So we'll endeavour to bring that to you at the July meeting. More information on there will be more on later. Okay, thanks, Alan.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. Okay, if we can move on to item 2, which is apologies for absence. Luke, have you received any apologies for this morning's meeting?
Yes, we've had apologies from councillors Wearmouth and Renna Thompson, and then apologies from Hannah Brown, Dave Cookson, Victoria McLeod, Warwick Stevenson, Joanne Blackhall and Joanne Holmes.
Can I just add one apology to that from Sue Aviston as well, Luke, who's just contacted me about she'd hope to join the meeting, but she's going to be unable to this morning.
Okay, thank you both. Item 3 is declarations of interest, and just a reminder, the easiest way to do this is as required. If we come up with any items that where you feel there's an interest in, declare it, and we can record it at that point. So if we go on to item 4, which is the minutes of the previous meeting and any matters arising from that. So I'll just go through it. So this on your agenda pack is on page 7 onwards. So if we just go through pages 1 and 2, happy with those. Page 3. Page 4. Page 5. Page 6. On page 7, just to follow up on any other business where we raised the item and discussed the item of our trade union facilities time. As a consequence of our discussion there and action points, I did write to the trade union reps to clarify our discussion on facilities time. And the second action from that was also we invited the trade unions to nominate a second representative to represent the teaching unions, which is why happily Steve's joined us for this meeting. So that was the follow up on those. Is there anything else, any other matters arising or any corrections required for those minutes, or can I accept them as a true record?
True record, Chair, as far as I can remember what's happened on that day.
As far as anyone can remember what happened this morning, Graham, yeah, that's great. Thank you.
I mean, I think most of the information on the, within the minutes is generally being picked up over the course of the key paper 6 anyway, Alan. So again, we'll pick up those items there. I know Audrey essentially wanted to come in terms of make a point more generally. Obviously, there has been a lot of information shared in relation to the school's white paper by the DFE over the course of the last few days. I think Audrey just wanted to link this to some wider points is it appropriate now, Audrey?
Yeah, thank you, Bruce. And my apologies, Chair and forum members, because I won't be able to stay for the whole meeting this morning. I felt it appropriate to say something about the school's white paper and our SEND consultation paper. It feels really odd if we don't, given that we've waited such a long time for these papers, had all sorts of promises, and we've now got the papers. I think it's fair to say we're still digesting all of the detail that's in the papers. I'm on a call tonight with the Secretary of State and have a number of meetings across the next week with different DFE colleagues, etc. So that information is still filtering through. So I don't think we're in a position as a forum to have a detailed discussion on that today. And what does that mean for us in Northumberland? I also think, and colleagues are much more likely to talk about this later in terms of DSG, we've got a number of aspects. You will have heard the announcement around the potential payment of up to 90% of the high needs overspend. And I'm saying that really carefully because we don't yet have the details or the criteria. So we don't yet know whether that 90% will apply to us or otherwise. What does that mean for us in Northumberland? We're not in a position to say that yet. So it felt really odd not to have some of this conversation this morning and not to say something. And I'd suggested to the team that I just said up front that we will come back to this at the most appropriate point. We've a number of decisions, I think, as a forum to make across the coming months. Once we know the detail of what this starts to look like more broadly for schools, but also particularly for high needs and for DSG impact more broadly. So that's all I really wanted to say. I think probably later in the meet this morning, Callum, David and Bruce will pick up around some of the DSG conversation. But sadly, we don't have a secret insight to some of the detail. We'd love it, but we haven't yet. And so once we have that, we'll share that more broadly with the forum. And that'll be on a basis on which we can then make some collective decisions. So I hope that was helpful, Chair, just to set out where we are.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think in my notes I've written about the devil will be in the detail, as always with these white papers, particularly a very, very long white paper. And actually I did run it through Copilot to see what are the implications for Schools Forum, and it did say we need some clarity around the references to pooled funding and SEND local clusters, etc. So that we will pick up that, I'm sure. And also later on in the agenda we will come to an additional meeting for the High Needs Committee as well. Graham?
Yes, I quite agree with what Audrey was saying, Chair. I obviously read the document on the way down to London on Monday when it came out, and I thought I did send Bruce some kind of dates when I was going to be free to call the High Needs Committee, which obviously took us right up to Easter. But I think we may need a much longer time to actually call our first High Needs Committee. I mean, it's quite confusing. I just read the easy read version, and then I looked at the main one. I thought that can wait for a bit of bedtime reading as well. Yeah, it's quite a complicated document. Yeah.
Audrey?
Yeah, Chair. So
Thanks,
I think I've read it about 3 times now, and each time I've spotted something else. So I think your comment, the devil's in the detail, I think is really important. And as ever, there's also some interpretation in there as well. So I've read a number of blogs where there is one, I can't even think of the word at the moment. My brain's a bit fried. But what it does, it has a different connotation and context if you read it in 2 different ways. So I think we need some clarity from Central. I'll ask that on the Secretary of State meet tonight. And regionally, we'll be doing some work as well. So obviously, all schools forums and all of our local authorities will be having the same discussion, the same across the country, actually. But importantly, we all need to be really clear so we make the right decisions and do the right work in Northumberland. You read it in one way and there's a huge amount of work to do. You read it in lots of ways, and we're already doing lots of this work in Northumberland, without doubt. I'll say it before David does, but last year we tried to have a Northumberland support plan and we're not allowed to do that. Interestingly, there's an individual support plan within the Green Paper consultation. you know, it talks about specialist spaces and it talks about localized provision. We're already there. We're already doing that. So actually, it's continue to do what we do and much more of it, and bring everybody into this. So this is every school across the whole of Northumberland. So you know, we've got some really good, strong practice that you all, as forum members and all of our wider colleagues, have been involved in that development, and that puts us in a really good position. That doesn't mean to say there's some stuff that we might not like in there, and we have to work out how we all do that together. So yeah, devil in the detail, absolutely spot on comment, Chair, for me.
Thank you. Bruce?
Just picking up on Graham's comment, I think in bearing in mind he addressed the easy read version. I think all things are relative, and even the easy read version is quite a battle in terms of their DFE papers often. I think just picking up Graham's point as well, we're proposing that we meet as a high needs committee in May, and we look for the most appropriate date there. That will give us a little bit time to again glean further information in terms of following the publication this week, and obviously Audrey's ongoing discussions. But that one then splits the gap quite well between this meeting and the next scheduled schools forum meeting at the beginning of July, again, which we'll pick up later on today. So hopefully we'll find a date that will be accessible to as many members as possible in May in relation to that.
Okay, thanks, Bruce. And just a reminder at this point, the High Needs Committee isn't limited in its membership. Anyone could attend that meeting when it's scheduled, and everyone is very welcome to. So I'm sure Graham will echo. James?
Yeah, thanks, Alan. Thank you also, Audrey. I was just going to say, when you're speaking to the Secretary of State later, it'd be interesting to see what she's planning in terms of, I think they're calling it Mission Northeast, but also Mission Coastal, because there are a number of coastal schools in Northumberland where there's that sort of double whammy of potential challenge. And I just wondered what her take on that will be later on.
It won't surprise you, they're already on my list, James. So those of you who were around when the North of Tyne Combined Authority was born, 2018, will recall that we had, I think it was called a Trailblazer as part of that devolved authority coming into being, actually. And part of that was to have an education challenge that matched the London challenge. And strangely enough, we weren't allowed to do that. DFE stopped it at every opportunity. So James, we could have been 8 years ahead on this in the Northeast. So it's really, really frustrating, actually. But I'll try and do a summary and get that out. I know, I think we've got both special heads this week, and Nash is either this week or next week. I can't remember. I'll try and do a bit of a summary, and then David can share that out, or I can share it out to school forum members if that's something that you would find really helpful.
Yeah, I think that would be welcome from schools forum members, Audrey. Thank you. Graham Atkins.
Thanks, Alan. Yeah, it's just a question in relation to the interim pause that we've got on top-up decisions and the release of funding to support kind of additional needs short of full EHCPs. That I understand is to run to April. Just wondering if there's any kind of change of position in relation to that, given the announcement, albeit not entirely fully detailed, around the write-off of 90% of the local authorities' deficits. I realise April is kind of approaching imminently. Is there a thought beyond April, given developments in recent weeks?
Yeah, we had planned to ask David to give us an update under any other business, but it seems prudent to do it now because it is really a matter of horizon. So, David, if you'd like to respond to that, please.
Yeah, that's why I've come in. If possible, Chair, could I leave it for any other business? It's just it slightly relates to some of the other papers that we're getting today.
Okay, that's fine. If the other papers bring context to it, it makes sense to
please,
keep it in any other business.
That's okay, just to get it in that order. Thanks,
David. If there are no other questions, I'll move us on to item 5, which is communication, and that's going to be led by Bruce.
Okay, we'll take the items in the order they are in the information pack. The first item under comms is essentially just the draft minutes of the High Needs Committee held on the Friday the 12th of December. We did pick up some of these issues at the last Schools Forum meeting. So again, we'll just work through those and pick up any questions or matters arising. Again, sort of page 15. Page 16, where we introduced the IPPR paper, which financial update from Callum in terms of page at the bottom of page 17. Again, as David's touched on, the High Needs Spend Control had it reported to the High Needs Committee on the 12th of December. We'll pick that up later. Some of the work strands through the High Needs Committee include the Special School Funding Model Review, top-up review for mainstream schools, and also the review of those decision-making panels, and also a review of the central teams. Again, so I think again, sort of picking up the actions there under point 13, we'll pick those up at the end of the meeting unless there are any specific questions anybody wants to ask in relation to the minutes. And as we'd suggested there, we were going to schedule a High Needs Committee following the school white paper, as it's obviously titled now. Obviously the key message there about the focus on inclusion. Are there any other questions in relation to the High Needs Committee draft minutes? Okay. We then take just again, obviously there has been additional information in terms of F40, but we thought it was worth sharing the initial response that was published a couple of weeks ago in relation to the an announcement by the government. Again, and actually this wasn't from the white paper, this was in the local government financial provisional settlement information. Obviously F40 make the link to the important link to the white paper and how how the system gets fixed, as opposed to, which is every bit as important as any the additional funding, very welcome though it is. Again, for anybody that's not aware, the F40 is essentially a group of local authorities who were formed originally around the lowest funded per student at the lowest 40 funded per student local authorities in the UK. And again, where we pay a small subscription to that, and we do get access to a lot of information, and we receive various updates through the course of the year. So that's what the F40 group is. And again, there's further information on F40 at the website that's at the bottom of that press release. Are there any questions or any questions or further comments in relation to either of the comms elements? Okay.
Thank you, Bruce. So that leads us into item 6, which is also you, which is the setting of the dedicated schools grant 26-27.
Okay. Obviously, members will see a certain familiarity with the paper, the overall paper on the funding that was brought to the last meeting. The key difference for this one is essentially it brings more specific budget proposals in relation to some of those key schools blocks for the information of Schools Forum, and there's a specific recommendation we're bringing as well, as just to underline the specific proposal we have at this stage for the use of the growth fund. But we'll come back to the recommendations at the end of the paper. Again, just setting a little bit of context, Northumberland is a county which, according to the DFE definition, does mirror the national funding formula. I think the key message for me around that this year is that, again, there was a little bit of surprise and disappointment last year when we were unable to fund at the full national funding formula rates. We have been able to, as proposed, we have been able to close the gap this year from approximately 1% around across the main funding formula values to 0.5%. So we have moved closer to the national funding formula rates. Again, part of the reason for that would be the initial benefits being felt from the free school meals campaign feeding that was undertaken in summer 2024. Is because of the nature of the lagged funding nature of the education, sort of funding. There's a long time cycle around that, but we're beginning to feel benefits of that, and that would be the case when in 12 months' time we receive the 27-28 settlement as well. Yeah, moving on. The final transfer, the high needs block, was agreed at 0.5%, and that figure has been reflected in the proposed budgets at both at the relative appendices at the end of this paper. Just reiterating again, and particularly in terms of the key challenge facing Northumberland in terms of overall schools funding is falling pupil numbers. We reiterated at the last paper that we'd fallen, I think, 600 for the 25-26 year, a further 500 plus for 26-27. When each of those students are worth a minimum of £5,000, I say that's got a real and significant impact on our schools. And again, that's the cost primary and secondary was estimated at £3 million, over £3 million for the 26-27 year. Probably worth again highlighting there that the local authority has requested that Seaton Valley take an additional 20 places at year 9 in terms of a feeder because of a bulge year for the academic year commencing 2026. So that's again from the local authority element of the growth fund, which is part of the overall schools block funding. The new information there, as you say, in terms of was around the, Audrey before alluded to the high needs stability grant, covering 90% of the historic deficits accrued to the end of 25-26. Again, we're waiting to see the detail around that, but that's the subject of ongoing discussions between obviously education and corporate finance. But the one thing that's evident in that is in terms of that it's conditional on the DfE's approval of a local SEND reform plan. And again, we know no more than that at this point. It is presumably going to be wider than simply a financial, a long-term financial budget moving into balance. It will be more fundamental than that across SEND, and that's obviously dependent on some of the subsequent information to emerge from the DfE. The final figures there in that final paragraph of the report. Again, I'm not going to go through and read those specifically. There's been no changes specifically in those, and we'll pick up the specific recommendations at the end of the paper. Obviously, moving to that sort of table 1, which essentially again shows the movement between both the national funding formula values and the Northumberland values over the course of the last 2 years. While again, a reminder that while some of the shift in both the national and Northumberland values may look large, a lot of that is because of the rolling in of the historic National Insurance Contributions Grants or Core School Budget Grant, which can overall inflate the position. As I reported to the last meeting, I think the overall shift is probably around just under 1%. I think reported 0.97%. Which is a relatively low level of increase, certainly below any inflationary measures at this point. And again, that comes back to the fall in pupil numbers influencing that, being the key influence on that. The good news is when this paper was written, it was initially subject to the final approval of the ESFA or the DfE rates, I should say now. We have received that at the beginning of the week, so we know the funding proposals have been accepted by the Department for Education. Okay, if I then move on to page 4 of this report, the high needs block. Again, the start of the report outlines the initial gross allocations, but then we have a significant element of that deducted automatically by the DfE for redistribution through some of the establishments as outlined in, for place funding as outlined in the first paragraph of the report. There is a link there which takes you to the high needs operational guide and additional information which is there for any members who wish to explore this in more detail. But for the moment, let's move on. It was interesting, and the new bit I've picked up this year. What interested me was the specific comment in the guide within the National Funding Formula guidance is, you know, DfE admission that essentially the funding formula as it stands for high needs probably wasn't working, and that in quote in italics there has been lifted directly from that paper. And essentially what they have said was, rather than the funding formula, the high needs block allocations for 26-27 were essentially calculated on the basis of 25-26. Again, at the bottom of that page, we have a summary of the overall high needs position, including the transfer from the schools block. In practice, after the recoupment, we have you know, £60.6 million in terms of resources available. But as we've outlined in the Appendix B, is the current service estimates would run to 67.4 million, identifying what we've termed a savings requirement, if you like, of 6.8 million. In terms of while that may seem significant, and indeed is significant, I think again in terms of just for broadly comparison purposes, the similar figure last year was 7.8 million pounds. So again, the authority has taken a responsible position while trying to support schools. But as I'm sure everybody's fully aware, it's a difficult balancing act at the moment. Again, moving on in terms of early years, simply reiterating the rates that were approved at the last meeting within the table there, and I think they have now been communicated to providers for you know, to give as much assistance as early as possible for planning purposes. Central schools block, central school services block, again made up of two elements: the historic element and the you know, the current services element, the ongoing statutory responsibilities. We have had occasional reports to Schools Forum highlighting the historic element is essentially to fund any long-term capital commitments that were being funded through the Central Services Schools block, Central School Services block, plus also any historic sort of pay and pensions costs prior to 2013 out of reorganisation. And I have to say this predates me. We were at a point though where the DfE have been looking to reduce year on year the historic element by 20%, and it became evident around the turn of the year that would reduce to a figure of the figure is reported of £427,000, which was less than our actual costs being incurred in relation to the historic commitments at the minute, specifically around pay and pension spend. We've made representations to the DfE in relation to that, and while we haven't had final definitive confirmation that that gap will be funded, nevertheless we've had hopeful noises at this point in relation to that. Again, the Appendix 1, the annex again reflects the position where we were last time. No main changes to that. The Appendix B is essentially the headline figures in terms of the high needs budget for this, proposed for 26-27. I think it's probably worth pointing out again in that respect that, of the, 60 or 63 million pounds worth of expenditure, available, worth funding available, the vast majority, as we've always emphasised, is simply going back to schools in terms of through place and top-up funding. There's £52 million accounted for, immediately by that main top line element of the budget there. And again, that would also overlook the 3.8 million in terms of for alternative provision and places through, managed through the inclusion team. Again, stops, pauses, happy to take any questions. Appendix C is essentially the Central School Services block. The papers have gone out with highlighting the potential shortfall in the historic commitment, comparing the actual current termination of employment and related pension costs of 533,000 to funding of 427. As I say, we have engaged with the DFE in relation to that, and I got an email through earlier on the week indicating that, subject to a committee meeting and formal approval, we're hopeful that we will recover, if not the lot. I think there may be £1,000 shortfall, again, but we're going to recover the vast majority of that funding, thankfully. Okay. Are there any other questions in relation to agenda item 6? If not, we will just go back to note the recommendations. And I think, obviously, I'm not sure, is Ben on the call? Ben Watson? No, Ben's not, because I think
he
No,
is.
no,
He is.
I am. Sorry, I just can't find my mute button. There we are. Hello.
Hi, Ben. Just obviously, like we're saying, in terms of because of your involvement with obviously Seaton Valley High, with it,
Yeah.
I would expect you to declare an interest and obviously stand aside from any vote in relation to this. Sorry, I'm conscious Graham's got his hand in the hand up as well.
Thanks, Bruce. Apologies because you have explained this before, but I'm a bit hazy on the reason why we struggle to meet the NFF values, and you've linked it to the following roles, but I don't fully understand it, so I would find it helpful if you could just kind of reiterate what that explanation is.
Certainly, Graham. There's a couple of elements in terms of while we've talked about the lag nature of the funding system, and we all know that essentially it's the previous October roll figures that set the subsequent budgets for either the financial year for maintained schools or academies being funded in the academic year as well. But the issue is the major parts of the budget. Sorry, and I'm just going to share this report, share a specific screen in this report. If we're looking at the Appendix 1, those unit values for primary and secondary are set using historic information, which go back obviously 12 months before that. So when we looked at this last year, essentially the actions we took around the free school meal campaign, which we reported to the committee in, I think it was October as opposed to November, are actually really positive and really beneficial, because what they will do is draw more of the school meals element. And again, as we can see there, both in terms of free school meals and Forever 6, that's worth over £1,500 per pupil. That's then matched by pupil premium, which is obviously outside of the school dedicated schools grant. But we don't feel the benefit of that until the subsequent financial year. So we were essentially spreading. We didn't lose any money, but we were spreading our allocated funding out across more students and more free school meals students in this case. So because we've received an initial benefit from the first year, more FSM units, more FSM Remote 6 units, we have been able to close the gap, but we haven't been able to eliminate entirely. I mean, and again, one of the key issues why we wouldn't be able to pay schools for it is the nature of the high needs block transfer as well. Hopefully the new system will see some reforms in that. We have agreed and we've demonstrated how that is being recirculated to our schools. But, when the DFE were designing their sort of, their funding systems and their funding formulas, they didn't take account of, those transfers either. So that, again, so there's two key elements there, Graham. The fact that we're losing, when we received the initial funding settlement through, and I've always caveated my concerns around the initial provisional figures that are often circulated, you know, either in the summer or the autumn term, they're always based on historic numbers, and you know, the previous pupil numbers, which in Northumberland's case were far higher. So when we received the actual settlement through in December, we were immediately, you know, £3 million lower in respect of that. So these are all contributory factors to what's a complex situation. I have thought actually there's been an awful lot of you know, sort of focus around high needs, and rightly so in relation to that. But if it would be worth, we will look maybe during the summer term or potentially earlier, where we've got a little bit more time, if there would be an interest in doing almost a catch up around funding formula, and you know, and how we see it going forward and how it works. I'd be happy to do that, either for, you know, for Schools Forum members who wanted to take more interest in that, Graham.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Bruce. Thanks for that. It just strikes me as being that it's set up to be fundamentally flawed, in that there are intended values that then don't translate to actual equivalence for an authority that has been trying for a number of years now to replicate the national model. There's a point here from Callum, and then I have another query just in relation to, or a point to make in relation to Appendix B, but we'll go to Callum first.
Yeah, absolutely right, Graham. First and foremost, it is just to put that kind of everything that we're discussing in more kind of simple terms. It's the multiplier effect of getting all the extra grants, getting all the extra bits that then is effectively averaged and taken away again. So because we get more than essentially what the ARPU would be, you're then losing out overall. And when we have a bigger drop, there's obviously then a bigger multiplier effect as we go down. Same as if you're growing, great, because actually you grow more than just the ARPU, you then grow the additional grants and everything else on top. So does work both ways, but we're very much, as with kind of the rest of the country, it seems to be going one way, and that's a decreasing pupil numbers. But I think your analysis is right, in that it seems a fault in the system.
Thanks, Callum. And then briefly, it was just in relation to Appendix B, and clearly that identifies the shortfall of 6.8 million, and this might be picked up in David's piece under AOB, but just wondered what is the thinking in relation to that over the course of 26-27? Is that sitting there until kind of we get further details around the deficit reduction, or are we committing to actually recouping that shortfall through actions? And if that's going to be covered by David later, then fine to leave it for now.
I'm sure David will pick that up later. I mean, personally, and it's not something we discussed all in great detail at this point. I think it's, you know, as you've suggested, Graham, I think it's a wait and see brief at this point to see what emerges over the course of the next 2 and 3 months.
Thanks, Bruce. Another very minor point, but just for future reference, Appendix B was really useful. Thanks for that coming forward. I think looking at the kind of budgeted figure in comparison to what was in there for last year would be interesting, just to see what the movement is in terms of what we're budgeting in these different lines.
Yes.
Yeah, just some for future reference.
Happy to circulate that after as supplementary. I think it'd be useful for everybody to see that.
Yeah. Okay.
I think great. what it would demonstrate, and again, I'm risk of being hoisted on my own petard here. What we have started to do is manage to level budgets or even make reductions to all of the internal sort of council services where we've reported previous sort of underspends in the past, and again we have focused resources into the area of greatest need, if you like, in terms of the funding that's going back to schools, whether that's through additional top-ups, whether that's through additional places in terms of to both our special schools and obviously the development of the the SSBs as well. So that element in terms of through that, the top part of the planned expenditure is where you'll see the significant growth over the past 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, and again, this might be picked up by David later, and absolutely fine. It'd be just interesting to understand the effect of the pause in top-up spending going back to whenever that was, October, just to see if that was a significant figure. It's placed pressures on schools, certainly. I'm not absolutely convinced it's defensible from a legal perspective, but that's a separate conversation. But it'd be interesting just to see that decision that was taken, for understandable reasons, just to see what impact it had financially, because it's played out in challenging circumstances on the ground in schools.
Okay, point note, maybe that's something we can pick up in the provisional year-end report, that would come in July.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, are there any other questions in relation to agenda item 6? Okay, if we can just take the recommendations then, please. First of all, looking for Schools Forum an agreement to the use of up to £66,010 growth funding to support the additional required places at Seaton Valley High School with effect from September 2026. If there are any objections, everybody's in favor. Can I take everybody's in favour? Thank you. And then specifically noting the specific budget proposals as laid out in the next 4 bullet points in relation to, the overall schools block formula values, the 26-27 high needs block budget, early years rates, and the central services to schools budget. Okay. Right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Chair.
Okay. Thanks, Bruce. Okay, so that takes us to item 7. There is a misprint in the agenda. It should say 25-26 high needs DSG monitoring report, and that's going to be taken by Callum. So over to you, Callum.
Okay, let me just share my screen, and then we can get on. This is contextual into what we're kind of going to discuss and go on to a bit later. But we thought it particularly with white paper and everything else kind of going on, that it would be prevalent to kind of show you a January position. This is all information up to the end of January, albeit we're at the end of February now, but it is literally kind of hot off the press in that I finalised this report only 2 days ago, actually. So let's move on. All the usual, that says exactly what I have just said, but it is forecast to the end of the year. It's not a position to January, it's using January to the end of the year. So it is still forecast, everything here is still provisional. Ultimately, we are looking at around £8.2 million overspend, and that's cumulative across the blocks. As we know, we'll have to add the blocks together at the end of the year to come to an overall deficit. We do not hold blocks separately. We just do it in year, kind of for an illustrative purpose, but then at the end of the year it rolls into one. The table that we all want to look at. So we can see that as it stands, Central Schools Block, Early Years Block and Schools Block are forecasting slight underspends in the context of the budgets. The High Needs Block is overspending by 8.764 million. Ultimately added together, we're coming to approximately 16.235 million overall, albeit if the other blocks were to not underspend, the high needs block would be 16.8 million. The reasons for this, underspends across the blocks. So within the Central Schools block, we have under kind of direction from last year, and the DFE, we have placed those children that we put in residential settings, we have funded through the high needs block rather than the central schools block, which has alleviated a small amount of funding temporarily. And just for this year, early years block, again, we got a contingency, we got a final settlement from the year before, from 24-25, which was slightly higher. So it was higher than what we were expecting to see. We have eaten into that somewhat with some programs and some additional payments to childcare providers, but we are still, that was approximately 280,000 that we had additional from last year, so we have eaten a good 100,000 into that, and the remaining of that is purely attributable to that extra. The schools block, as in line as we have kind of in previous years, the reorganisation for the Berwick schools won't hit effectively, or partly won't hit this year, so it will hit next year. So it is that element of the schools block that we are not currently planning on spending. Let's move on to the high needs block. The big ticket items, top up funding continues to overspend by 2.5 million. That is in line with our EHCP growth. So when we're talking about, yes, the pause, etc., we are still seeing high EHCP growth, and obviously when you come in, it is a pause on existing and going between bandings rather than on new ones, because that would be totally illegal. But we are still seeing this additional growth. We had budgeted in what we called the legacy deficit, which is essentially what we were, if we took every plan and didn't grow a single plan from last year, that is the position that we will be in. We would still be £5.179 million overspent. So actually that growth, if you, in a way, is the difference between your 5.179 and your 8.7. So that's what we're seeing as in-year growth in terms of costings. It would be higher if we didn't have the pause. Whether that's a lot higher or a little higher, we'll do some delving. We also have seen this year a big increase in exclusions, so 260 permanent exclusions to December. The inclusion service did overspend last year, but it wasn't significant. This is becoming, it is now a significant overspend, and AP costs that we pay for within the block have increased substantially, which contributes to that as well. Haven't seen a massive increase in the transport in that team, whereas we've done quite a lot of work on transport and cutting it down. Given bus passes, we're constantly on that, but the fact that we've had such a lot of exclusions come in, but the transport costs haven't gone up massively, shows the kind of good work that we are doing internally to try and maximise the elements that we possibly can within the high needs block. Additional places, so we will be playing out at least 96 additional places above commissioned to special schools, and the early opening of Linton Primary SSB means that additional places put in there will come out of kind of the existing cake, if you like. We don't get additional funding from the DFE in year for those places. It comes out of what's sitting there already. That is subject to a final reconciliation. So I know this because I've done this piece directly myself, in that is very much up to kind of the first week in January. Obviously, I'm expecting additional special school place growth on top of that, just as a warning, and when I'm coming to what I'm going to come to later, it goes in line with that. So while I'm talking about 16.8, if all the other blocks remained as it were, it is liable to kind of final reconciliations, final accounts of SSBs, and special schools. We've got a visual of what the large overspends and the, I'm going to say large underspends. They're not when you look at them comparatively. Personal budgets is another line where we have seen, we saw actually quite a lot of growth last year, but because we did such a fantastic job, particularly within Bruce's team in recouping monies owed from North Tyneside, Newcastle and other authorities which had been owed for years, it kind of it cancelled down the position for last year. So actually, while we were slightly underspent within personal budgets last year, but we don't have the luxury of kind of 4 years worth of owed money this year, which shows or starts to reveal the true position on personal budgets and why we've kind of kept highlighting this as an area of continued growth. Independent placements, because we have had SSBs opening, we have had special schools expanding in 96 places. We have currently got a small forecast underspend of £255,000 on independent special school places. We will continue to monitor this and monitor that and the effect of kind of moving the models, the transformation model for special school, which again we'll come on to. This is a key area that we're kind of looking to eat into. The other side of what comes into there is within social care. So commission places within residential places within social care often have, particularly if they're out of county, often have an education element which comes out of the high needs block. Education, the residential external placements have gone from I'm trying to think of it's 39 2 years ago to over 85 now, and you will, if you manage to catch the enthralling budget at Northumberland County Council on the 18th of February, it was a key highlight within there. Guy stood up and was asked about our highest costing jointly commissioned place, which is just £3,000 under £800,000 a year, and that's for one child. Our highest commissioned education place, correct me if I'm wrong, Bruce, but was just shy of £130,000 a year. So they are significant. It is we are as education colleagues very closely under the same bracket with Audrey with social care. We do have impact and decision making in there, but it is just one to highlight because we are seeing higher growth in the social care sector. Bruce, do you want to come in now?
If I may, Callum, I mean, It's a really good point you made. I think across the wider council, there's been a lot of discussion in terms of and significant investment in terms of looking at children's social care, children's residential care, in terms of the development of in-house local authority residential options, because of the pressures we know about in relation to, independent sector residential care, as Callum's just outlined in terms of placement costs. And I think in terms of it is worthwhile drawing the parallels with education in relation to that, because essentially that's something we've been doing for the last 4 or 5 years in terms of working with our independent special schools to develop and grow our own, expand capacity and increase our own places, because we know particularly of the pressures that the independent sector can will provide in respect of that. So despite a doubling in the number of plans, I think our our independent special school, largely day placements, have stayed largely the same over the last 3 or 4 years, which is, again, no mean feat. Thanks, Callum.
Graham, do you want to come in now as well?
Yeah, just obviously there in your report, Callum, which is very good. The 260 PXs, right? How many of those are primary and how many of those are secondary? Would you know?
I don't have that information. I'm just looking at David to see if he has that information.
Because obviously, if a child obviously has got to get alternate provision in primary, it's going to cost much more than obviously a child who could go to school on the secondary. Yeah.
it's the longer term implications of that, like you say, Graham, in terms of primary. That there has certainly been a growth in primary permanent exclusions. Again, I don't have those numbers to hand either. That's something we can subsequently provide. But it's about, the figures we report are essentially the number of exclusions in year, which is what, again, we can monitor in terms of that. The key issue is how many students we're continuing to support year on year in alternative education placements, which will be higher than the 260 because of, the brought forward numbers, if you like. That's certainly something we'll bring maybe to high needs.
Yeah. Just Callan, from last academic year, how it's gone up quite a lot, because I can't try to find the figures from last year of PXs across the county.
It has comparatively. I have a number in mind, but I don't really want to be quoted on it. I think it was somewhere around 100 less at the same point. But again, we can include that as supplementary information afterwards, just to give additional context. I'm sure that wouldn't be an issue. I am told it's predominantly primary pupils, but I don't have a number.
That's okay. Well, obviously we'll be able to share that at some other later date. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Callum.
Again, to build on, we can do some supplementary information on residential homes as well. We do have lots of satellite sites opening in the county. We are opening another 7 beds, which is quite a big, it's almost an 80% increase actually from where we were. We are looking at short breaks unit. We are looking at high needs complex home, which we applied for DFE funding grant for, which we were successful in the summer. So there are other things helping us here, but it's very much secondary to the pressures being put directly into social care. Hint, Lint, both. It is a recurrent thing. There's short-term vacancies across the Hint and Lint team, and I'm aware that it is recurrent, and it's one of the reasons we are within the rapid reviews looking at central teams and how we can possibly change what's some of that aspects to kind of minimize vacancies and make sure that kind of we've got the provision and support, because it's great seeing an overspend there and underspend there, and it offsets some other things, but we all know the ultimate effect of that is possibly more costs in some of these other services and more costs to schools, and we know how important the Hint and Lint teams are to schools, so that is fundamentally part of one of our review areas. Let's move on. Comparison, I thought I would draw us back, not to say how necessarily how accurate I am with forecasting and toot my own horn, but in July we gave the outturn for the previous year, and for the first time I sort of went, we need brackets, we need to look at these things in risk kind of format. At that point we said that we anticipated the cumulative deficit to be between 17.1 and 19.8. If the other blocks weren't overspending, as I said, it would be 16.8, contingent on a final reconciliation of places and SSBs and all that sort of thing. So it is on course. We are doing a lot of mitigation measures through the year, which has brought that down slightly. So we're not looking at the moment at the top end of that bracket, but we are looking at the bottom end of that bracket. I've bolded it there. I do still expect to be in that bracket come year end. 16.8, as great as the forecasting is, there are kind of final bits and pieces to piece together and corroborate. thought as well, since was in the budget, was mentioned last week, some of the mitigation measures that we've kind of got in place, and we will get onto rapid reviews and etc. But these are kind of 6 of the things that we are doing, that we are actively working on to bring down and manage the high needs block. So obviously with SSBs and in-house capacity boosting, we are doing panel banding and transport reviews ongoing. We have continuously for a good number of years, as Bruce has alluded to, kind of reduced in context, in real terms, reduced the independent and out of county placements. We have the special school funding transformation, which I will get to. We are looking at AI integration within EHCPs, and where we can use AI to help with workload and get accuracy and do some of the basic things. Not obviously the more complex, but the basic things, just to see how we can use it to improve. And we have got an ongoing SEN restructure throughout the team, which will in turn reap its benefits and become a more modern, needs adapted service. We do also, it is worth pointing as well, that we are looking at expanding and we have continued to expand Northumberland skills provision at post-16 level to make sure that we have the offer that, as we see EHCPs growing through schools, so that the post-16 kind of can grow and cope with that on the other end as well. Final bit. So if there's any questions on any of that, or anything that anybody wants to pick up or ask specifically on, I'm all ears. But if you want to ask after, I think you all know my email address anyway. But no. Right, there we go. Everyone's happy. Bruce, Alan, thanks.
Thanks, Callum.
Thanks, Callum. I'm not sure happy is the word to describe the mood of everyone when you see the level of increase in exclusions, and no doubt matched by suspensions. But we did at the outset, I think at Schools Forum, acknowledge that when we had to bring the high needs spend under control, that the inevitable consequence would be an increase in suspensions and exclusions, because schools simply can't take higher numbers and more complex needs without the support they need, and it not manifest into behavioural issues, unfortunately. So I think we've got to remember that this is a product of the national situation with SEND funding. Hopefully the government are now going to get that under control, but it is going to take some time. And I think sadly, I can only see the exclusions going one way until we get the national situation under control. And therefore, funders at a local level at the funding we need.
It'll be interesting, Alan, just to see that there's mention of the inclusive mainstream fund in the initial detail, but again, in the initial publications, no detail around that yet. There's the potential it sort of mirrors the approach we've taken around the additional notional payments, top-up payments at a school level as opposed to an individual student level in Northumberland. But as I say, we await further information around that.
Okay, thanks, Callum. Thanks, Bruce. So we move on to item 8, which is the 2026 work programme and meeting dates.
Thanks, Alan. Just an important one. Obviously, we had some discussion at previous meetings about, while we did value the opportunity to come together in the July meeting at Schools Forum when we meet at County Hall, the fact that it was originally scheduled for the very last week of term did cause some pressures and challenges, certainly to sort of teaching ahead teacher members of the forum. So we've revised that date as reflected in midway down agenda item 8 to Wednesday the 1st of July. Hopefully that will be an easier date for as many of us as possible to get together in County Hall for the final Schools Forum meeting of the academic year. It's just worth highlighting that one. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce, and also that we'll need to agree a date for the May meeting of the High Needs Committee and get that out as soon as we can as well.
Yes, we will.
Okay, so under any other business, we'd agreed prior to this meeting that David would give us an update on the high needs spend control. So it's over to you, David.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, I'll do my best to try and answer some of the questions that have been asked and give a little bit of context about the progress that's been made with Spend Control Board. The history doesn't take us back that long, but it's sort of September time. There was a consideration of implementing a Spend Control Board to really get under the skin of the expenditure within the high needs block, which sorry, Graham, but you did mention before the council's deficit. Well, it's not council money, it's schools' money, of course. So collectively, the debt sits within the school budget. Having said that, there was also a concern at the time that should our sort of agreed overdraft on the schools blocks be withdrawn by central government, that actually the deficit would be left with in the council's lap, and as a result, it was highlighted as being quite a significant risk to the council in order if they were required to fill that gap in one go. As a result, they wanted some direction for some further investigation of where we were and some of the measures. Obviously, Forum have been talking about measures that could be taken to try to control growth or the expenditure, different ways of cutting the cake, etc. Been doing that since Forum was instigated, but obviously it's become more pertinent in the last few years as the combined blocks have fallen into overall deficit. The Spend Control Board instigated, and Audrey wrote to all schools and providers to pause in some actions that were causing dramatic increases in expenditure, and also to call upon some rapid review pieces of work to be taken, which would ideally create some proposals and some outcomes, which would create a firmer structure, I suppose, around which the whole SEND system can try to operate under obviously very difficult circumstances. The pause was related specifically to the bespoke funding group. So you asked a question before, Graham, about whether the pause has saved any money or not, and it is a bit difficult to tell exactly. But just one of the reasons the bespoke funding group was brought to the forefront of the control board's mind was because last August there was a meeting held where the combined requests for additional funding just at that 1 month meeting was somewhere in the region of £700,000. So even though that doesn't mean that the £700,000 was allocated, that was the request, which possibly does highlight the pressure on schools. I agree 100% with that. But if that board had continued into September, another 700,000, October, if that was the case, then clearly Callum's report now, and Bruce's input from before, sobering though they are for the current position, I do think that one in particular, the bespoke funding group continuing, I think would have led to some quite different numbers at the end of the year. There were also some delegated powers that were with officers to increase bandings independently. Important to support schools with that and smooth flow. That action was paused. Because the board wanted to understand more about what the controls were around and whether there was consistency between officer decisions. There was also a pause in school age STAR, which was only a small proportion of the budget, but it was a practice that maybe wasn't demonstrating the impact that possibly the system was hoping to have. So that was where the pauses were. What wasn't paused was all the payments that were currently being made, new payments coming for new plans, and we've seen again a significant increase in the number of plans. Expenditure for permanently excluded learners, that wasn't paused, and we've seen the increase in that and the knock-on effect on the bottom line of the budget. We didn't pause the development of specialist places, because we know we need to meet the needs of the young people that require that, and there was no pause in personal budgets, and the growth in personal budgets, even though because it's an entitlement of families and residents in Northumberland. So there was a number of areas where expenditure has continued to grow, but those ones I mentioned at the start were the ones that have been paused. Their growth has been paused. At the same time, actions to move us forwards. There's been a range multi-agency approaches to 4 work streams. We've had a work stream looking at panels, both for the efficiency and effectiveness of panels in terms of timeliness, though timeliness for panels has actually increased quite dramatically in the last 2 years, but still wanted to look at that. But also, obviously, the panel decisions are, all intents to have financial implications, and therefore there was a look to see whether those panels were well informed enough to make the right decisions, not making decisions on purely on a financial basis, but recognizing the financial knock-on effect of a particular panel decision. We also have been working on looking at banding systems. The banding system has been the same for a number of years. There's been banding creep, where the average banding price has gone up, though the system behind it hasn't changed in value. We've done, I say we, there's been a collective effort to look at special school funding. I think Callum's going to talk to us a little bit about some outcomes from that shortly. And we've also been looking at central teams. And in a nutshell, the panels working group now has a set of proposals which are being drafted into a paper for consideration by all parties. The banding system is likewise, where a paper is being produced now with a set of proposals for consideration by all parties. Special school funding is the most advanced working group. A number of special school heads on the call today will have been in quite in-depth conversations with Callum, and my understanding is that there's broad agreement of quite a radical and different approach to the funding of special schools, which creates in its ethos less variation and less debate about funding, to try to put a sound basis behind the schools so that they can plan better for the future. That's the furthest progressed one. And the central teams, there's a combination of actions going on. There's a paper to be delivered about some more generic work across the teams and about how that might or might not be organised going forwards. But there is also been a full restructure of the statutory assessment team. And we're in the final stages of that restructure. And although that particular team is actually funded by council funds, those officers do go on to make decisions currently which impact on high needs block spend. So we've completed or are about to complete a restructure there, with a view again to ensure that the financial management within those teams is as efficient and as effective as possible. In terms of the initial pause, it possibly wasn't the right phrase to use. I think probably the best way to consider it going forwards, and I had a discussion with Audrey on this and others yesterday, is how would she like me to describe what's going to happen next, or the proposal for next. And Audrey's proposal is a slow release of the pause. So we should see relatively rapidly a release from any pause actions in and around special schools, which, even though it might only involve 10 of our schools, they do spend a significant amount of high needs block. So I think it's probably right that that bit has come first, and that the proposals around panels, banding systems, which is the bit that affects the majority of schools, but to a lesser degree, is that based in our understanding of the white paper over the next 2 to 3 weeks, based on the outcomes from our local area SEND inspection, which was completed whenever that was, a week and a half ago. And I think also tied to the implications of the new schools Ofsted framework. And as we see more schools go through the current Ofsted framework, the implications of that and the outcomes from that, I think, will probably influence some of the decisions to be made. There could be a thought, which is, we've had more recently some indication that the deficits for schools blocks will be refunded to the tune of about 90%. We don't yet have the detail on how that's going to occur. There could be a line of thought that says, well, the pause was pointless because we would have got 90% written off now at this point in time. And I can understand that as a viewpoint, absolutely. Having said that, I'm pretty sure of two things. One, that this is a one-off. So should it straighten a little bit of our deficit out now, on the 1st of April, if we continue as we were going, we'll be hugely, 2 years' time, we'll be back in the same deficit. I also think, and particularly in lines of our, not our experience, but another local authority's experience of the safety valve system, which is a preemption to this. Some of the local authorities who were massively in debt previously were involved in the safety valve system, which did come with some additional funding. They were only entitled to that additional funding if they had a programme in place to show a balanced budget going forwards. So again, I'm sure there will be some provisos. I cannot see government just giving us 90% cut in our deficit with no strings attached. And it would be wise of them, I think, as a public body to do so. So here's a significant, I say it's not going to be an investment in new stuff. In the old things, we've already spent the money. The schools, we've collectively already spent the money. But here's trying to level us up a bit. But at the same time, I think the proviso on getting some of the money will be strings attached to how are you going to operate going forwards. And Callum's presentation just now, which highlighted this year's in-year deficit, if we hadn't been in the position of having the pause, I think we'd be quite a long way behind taking the next steps that we'll need to take. And I cannot profess to know exactly what they are. They'll need to be jointly decided in order to try to run our budgets as close to a net nil as possible going forwards, or at least moving towards net nil going forwards, which is what I'm hoping for. We might get as the provisos that cover that. A few unknowns, some progress made. That's roughly where we are. Barry.
Hi, David. I wonder whether, looking at the release, whether it's approached not on what's setting the children's at, but on a risk basis. I'm just conscious there could be children in mainstream schools which actually might have a greater risk from not having that provision put in place. So it's just a thought to share.
And I think that's a good point, Barry. We actually talked yesterday in terms of trying to say what this slow release might look like. was about exceptional cases actually. I mean, it's a six roundabouts because obviously for every parent, of course, their child is an exceptional case, and but for schools in particular, where they've got exceptional cases which are clearly going to or most likely going to lead to something which will cause further expenditure elsewhere. That's possibly part of it. So I think the job for myself and others within the team is to Callum's going to do a bit of this now. He's going to talk about special school funding to share that with all parties, even though special schools themselves already know the detail of that. But also we need to share a number of papers with you from the working groups about what the proposals are, and also within that also explain what the slow release could look like, to try to see us not getting back to normal but to a new normal, bearing in mind that we'll have to factor in any clauses around additional government funding, and also the expectations of the white paper, the outcomes from this local area SEND inspection, and actually, like I say, the impact of the new Ofsted framework in schools and settings across the board.
I suppose that'll be that challenge of assessing the risk, but also considering, has the school already got the provision that's needed to meet those needs, and might not actually require additional funding as well. So looking at those two, because you're right, from a parent's perspective, I think every single parent would say this is a must, I need this right now, because it's obviously a motive. Yeah, I think looking at that rather than what type of school at risk and what does the school already have, that would be a clearer determination.
I think particularly the panel's working groups have got some ideas about, like I said, the thing about timeless being responsive, and they might well have a proposal which would link to how they might work with or assess how exceptional the exceptional cases are that are put forward. Yeah. Graham?
Thanks, David. I think I would just say that got to be careful with a kind of a blanket position, and that was the case certainly, or is the case at the moment with regards to the pause, and you've explained that there's a bit of a shift away from that, but actually for mainstream schools that they might not see much of a difference there. And understandably, you refer to developments that are going to be forthcoming over the coming years in relation to the white paper. We're still operating under the code of practice, and it's very clear that there is an obligation on schools to spend up to a threshold to meet need. And beyond that, it absolutely sits from a statutory perspective with the local authority for that additional funding. So the position is potentially weak in relation to the code of practice, and I think we support it from a financial perspective, but from a meeting our obligations under the code of practice, I'm not sure it stacks up, and therefore the point about looking at each case on its own terms, I think really is important.
Yeah, no, I agree, Graham. And though you're right, within the code of practice and other documentation, that the role of the local authority is pretty clear. But also within the same sets of documentations collectively, the expectation is that the local authority will meet the need, but that will be funded from the high needs block. And therein is the juxtaposition of where we are. Because the high needs block is schools' money. So it's this balanced position, trying to create a balance, as close a balance as we can in very difficult pressures situation, both financially and, more importantly, the pressures that schools and settings are facing every day. You're right, there is local authority responsibility, but the expectation over time has always been, and is recorded in multiple places, that that's funded by the high needs block. But the funding's not enough in the high needs block, and therefore, hence why we're, whatever, 17 million overspent cumulatively on that.
And we certainly understand from a financial perspective, but I think from legal challenges that you've been involved with that the funding challenge is not sufficient to justify not meeting the second code of practice obligations. And the central government has recognised this with the write-off, albeit potentially just for a moment in time, and then there's still this issue about recurring deficits, certainly under the existing system. But I think we all understand the reasons behind the pause and potentially the reasons for an attempted continuation of that. But it looks shaky from my perspective in relation to how it could be defensible if challenged by individual schools who are seeking additional funding legitimately under the code of practice. That from a statutory perspective has to be forthcoming.
Certainly don't. I can totally understand the viewpoint. The considerations going forwards is we need to look at how all the money is working, and are doing, and you're doing that on a daily basis as well, and in and around the white paper and other sort of signals of direction of travel. Redesign the system to most efficiently meet the needs that we've got, and that's the aspiration, of course, and it's much easier to say than do in practice, but that's what we're all trying to do. I think the more we can, bodies like Schools Forum, support and work with each other under some tricky circumstances, that is the way to make the most progress with it, in my view, and I'm sure we're all committed to that.
Sorry, David, I was just going to sort of pick up a point there in terms of, in line with what Graham's saying. And again, there's some irreconcilable issues here we're not going to address today, but in relation to funding specifically and funding for sort of SEN students and funding in special schools, the issue we have is essentially there is, as stated by the DFE, a common position across both mainstream and special schools when they set the MFG threshold, and that's something that's dictated by the DFE, not the local authority. And across both mainstream pupils and special school pupils, that's been set at 0% at this point. Challenging though it is, and I think essentially, what that means in practice is that no pupil should see a cut in their funding. And that's something I think we can fully underline that we've done over the course of the last sort of 6 months and well before that. I take a point entirely in terms of the statutory side. I think that's one of the elements that's hopefully also going to be addressed, as the various threads of the white paper unwind. So that's me done. Barry? Next. Sorry, David.
One of those to whether we are funding it already, but maybe it's not going directly to schools. But let's say if there is a child which needs some additional support, if you look at Northumberland, wider than just the educational provision, there is a lot of support within Northumberland. I think that's something really positive within the white paper about looking at schools as anchors in the community, but they're not the only organisation or group of people with accountability for students. So I wonder whether actually we have a lot of support within the local authorities, such as family hubs, and other provisions. And actually, it's more about awareness and joint up work with those other groups to, when a child needs support, to see whether, rather than it just being additional funding towards the school, are there additional organisations already funded in the local authority which actually schools can tap into to sort of fill that void. Just a question.
Thanks,
Jess?
Barry. Yes.
Hi, yeah, just to mention as well, and just really in line with what Bruce said there, in terms of the funding for the plan remains stable. The only real, it should be quite rare in terms of seeing, and it was becoming quite unwieldy in terms of every annual review, where we were getting multiple requests to increase funding, but ultimately those plans, unless there's been a significant change in need, the provision should remain stable. So in terms of the amount of EHCPs that are looking to have increased top-up relating to provision. So, and by changes of need, that might be the child was presenting as SEMH, but under further assessments over time, that might be speech and language. So unless there's been significant changes, but ultimately, when they go through that EHC needs assessment or COSA within Northumberland, and really way before that, during that support time within settings, then the need should be quite clear and the provision clear in terms to meet the need in that plan. And therefore the needs and the provision that link to section B of the plan remains stable. So we shouldn't really be seeing much change in funding and therefore increases in funding every annual review. And what we're aiming to look at, and with the restructure within the statutory team, is to have a transition team. And now that team will really focus on those transition reviews. So for example, from year 6 into year 7, or from year 11 into post 16, to really make sure that there's key points throughout that EHCP, those annual reviews, where we as a local authority are quality assuring that those plans are robust and fit for purpose, but also relate to the child and young person. Because I think where we are seeing them frequently coming through, I think my question is why, and ideally we want to remain stable, just as we are looking at with the special school funding. So we can see the special school average funding coming through, and it should be that within mainstream. So you as head teachers and wider stakeholders should see that funding, and that's, again, a significant change in need and provision. There shouldn't be any changes to top up. So I think on that one, I think some of that might relate to wider multi-agency training in that area as well.
Just a final point, apologies, David Allen.
On that from Jessica, if that's okay. The thrust of my question was less about EHCP top-ups. It was more about funding outside of EHCP, so staff funding, for example, and funding beyond the 6K, which is not coming through, and that's where the challenge. But I take your point that once an EHCP funding stream has been set, that's likely to stay stable. So it was more in these other areas that my concern exists. But I do welcome what you're saying, Jessica, in relation to reviews at key transition points. And I think one of the points for us as a forum is there's 26 million budgeted for top-ups. I think that was the line, that the money, so there's the process around the panel decision making. The panel makes the decision if money is released, but what's the kind of further scrutiny on the subsequent spending of that, and the changes that may take place in relation to the impact of the provision and the adaptations to maybe reduce the requirement for funding. I mean, it's certainly not always the case that pans out, but is there any further scrutiny and review that tries to get control of that 26 million expenditure that's released? So that's an area perhaps to look at, and that's, Jessica, you're more conversant with what that might look like. But it did strike me that the excellent work that's coming out of the team around SEND peer reviews, which are really beneficial, whether part of that process could be just looking at the value for money in relation to the need that was effectively funded initially. Perhaps less so with the HCPs and more with the broader funding. Anyway, that's good.
Bruce, you coming back in?
Apologies, yes, it was just picking up one point Barry made, ironically, about the sort of multi-agency approach and responsibilities. Again, the devil is in the detail, and it's not the first time the phrase has been used, but there is reference in the white paper to this expert at hands service, and how, in terms of local authority led, but very much a multi-agency report. So it will be interesting to see how that, evolves as the, various threads unwind.
Thanks, Bruce. Jess?
Yeah, Graham, I totally agree on your point as well. And I think that what's interesting within Northumberland and coming from an outsider back into the Northeast, the staff funding really, it was to support those kind of that SEND support level, maybe moving towards a COSA EHC needs assessment. But I think that the what we've done with some of our RIA funding from the DFE is to go back to that focus at that really strong provision mapping and graduated approach, because if we are moving forwards for an EHC needs assessment from our statutory point of view, we want to get the needs earlier identified and reflected within that plan with or without a diagnosis in section B. And if it's really clearly identified in section B, which is a legally challenged part of an EHCP, section B then relates very nicely to section E and F, which is the outcomes and provision, again legally challenged at mediation and tribunal. So we get that right in the plan. From my point of view, again, unless there's been a real significant change in need, that is very stable for a good key stage. And therefore, from a school's point of view and wider stakeholders, and more importantly, children, young people and carers, the expectations are really clear. And we link that really tightly to the review that we're doing currently. Second session is today around that ordinarily available provision within Northumberland, and we tighten that up. So we say this is what's ordinarily available, but actually this is what's really clear within your EHCP in terms of that targeted provision. Thinking about the new language, it's not new really, is it? But thinking about that language within the white paper, and therefore then the allocated funding attached to the plans becomes really clear to see. And so I think that's the key here. So the STAR funding for me was kind of, it was like that SEND support plus level, if you like, but really let's get the EHC needs assessments in more quickly with more robust plans. And I think that's why we removed the STAR funding, because, you know, it looked like 9 times out of 10 they were leading into a plan anyway. So can we help get that in a little bit earlier? Thank you.
Thanks, Jess. Just going to agree with you, though, Graham, both the panels working committees and the banding system working committees have both been looking quite strongly at scrutiny. So, you know, once the decision's made, you know, how impactful is that actually? So again, when you get a chance to see the papers coming from those working groups, then there'll be a range of proposals, and you'll see some of that is about what happens after the panel as well, not just make a decision and see where we get to. Yeah. Okay, if that's all the questions on that's my sort of update there. I think we've got Callum poised to come in just to give a little bit more detail on one of the work groups, which is the special school funding. It was a whistle-stop tour, Callum, and then just help with everyone's understanding.
Yeah, will do. I thought about what kind of presentation I should kind of put here, if you like, and kind of settled on, you know what, let's go with exactly what we've told the special schools so that everybody's absolutely clear. And then we'll move on, because we have had a formal consultation with the special schools. We have got all the results and everything else in, so we'll quickly review them afterwards as well. So let me just share my screen again, and got me doing another presentation here. So it's all about equity, fairness, and kind of predictability going forward. At the moment, the way that special schools are funded, there is no inflation aspect. There is very little in terms of placement building going forward at any one point. So it is very much looking at a 4-year effect. I know, you know, most mainstreams here, we do look at 3-4 years and over that time, but there's emphasis across the board so that after kind of year 2, year 3, they're not all falling off a cliff, so that they can better plan, and when the realities actually kind of can be put into budget spreadsheets, so that instead of knee-jerk reactions, whether it's making staffing redundant or taking additional children at the last minute or building additional capacity at the last minute and rushing it through, that we can plan these things further in advance and we can set a budget based on that. and that is what we as a high needs spend control and special schools all think this model kind of solves. At the moment, why the models matter, we are seeing, as you all know, EHCPs continuing to increase, and it's about putting the money in the right place. I think I've talked about everything else more or less on that slide. Key changes. This is probably the most important slide. This is the one that I think my special school heads on here will be kind of going, oh, come on, I've seen this for 3 hours already. Four aspects. I won't go to one because that would be too easy. Let's go to two first. Averaging top-ups. So at the moment, what we've got is quite a lot of dispute between funding when going into placement in special schools and all schools. If what we're looking at is the average top-up for every special school, so every child has a banding as it is. We are pegging those so that you effectively special schools have an average already. If you think they might all have individual payments, individual plans, but they are effectively paid an average because it comes to an average overall. We have taken that average and we have included within in that average the MSAG, so £660 per place, and that was based on places, not pupils, and the 3.4% legacy, which by the DFE instruction gives us is meant to include in top-ups anyway. So whilst it gets paid as a separate grant at the moment, lump sums, it is based on old information. It's based on, in some cases, 2 years old commissioned places, and I think we're all aware growth in special schools over the past 2 years has increased quite substantially. So actually, there is a large amount of funding there that doesn't effectively follow the pupils in the year or even the pupil growth from the previous year. So the proposal will be to tuck those grants in with top-ups to be reactive. So as soon as you get the child at the door, you get that average top-up paid from day dot. The other kind of aspect of this is reducing barriers. So there might be an argument between, say, a band C and a band E, between the authority, the parents, the schools. We might want to place this child, they might need placing at September, but due to this ongoing disagreement, which in cases is last months, 6 months, 9 months, you better believe after 9 months of not being in the right place, they are that E. They are that band E and they need additional support. In fact, they might even now at that point be a G and they might need additional support. It's not helpful. It's not good for outcomes. It's not good for parents. It's not good for schools, and it's not good for the authority. So if we can reduce some of them barriers, we can get them in, we can do the average and then go back and review averages as an annual review overall, a set point in the year, we can make sure that we get the right places at the right times and for the right kind of students. So I've talked about averages there, but that's tucked in then with lump sums and other grants. So as I've said, parts of the grants that DFE direct into top-ups anyway would go in. The other one that we've looked at is a lump sum. At the moment, all special schools get a £70,000 lump sum payment. It's not linked to places, and actually within the DFE guidance, it actively advises against doing that, because any kind of lump sum payment should be made through places. So instead of that, we are looking at places and increasing places through the year. That tucks into our what we've termed the OGR, which is the occupancy growth. So where we expect places to grow through the year, the occupancy of the places currently. If we are using 90% of our places rather than 70, then it kind of guides as to where we would look to place kids. Obviously, there's needs and all sorts of other factors involved in that, but where they're more likely to turn up, I guess, is where we would hopefully then see the growth and would be suitable. And that's something that we're kind of trying to get up. It's not attendance, it is occupancy. And it means that every conversation that I have, that we have, the school has with special schools, then has a 4-year kind of plan. This is the growth that we're seeing in EHCPs. This is the growth we're seeing in mainstream. This is the growth we're seeing in special school. How can we get you to a point where we're realizing what your actual growth is going to be in the individual special schools? How can we boost capacity? What capital then needs to be reduced, aligned to that capacity, and how do we help the special school get there? As part of that, then will be growth commissioning places in special schools, which means that, again, once you get the child midway or partway through the year, if it's January, you will already have had the place funding to essentially prepare that place through the year to be able to take on that child and then have the average top-up kick in from that point. Gives a degree of certainty to the funding, and again allows schools to plan ahead for the future of the year, never mind future years on top of that. In line with that, we are not expecting to then pay any fixed in-year place funding. You'll recall from the presentation that I did earlier, almost £800,000 going in additional places to special schools as in year, because it's above commissioned. We're not anticipating doing that. Reason being, when we commissioned places when we commission growth places at the beginning of the year, it factors into the high needs block formula. So actually, we see a degree around 50% of the funding for places come back in through DFE. It's how it builds up the cake to begin with, if you like. As my same metaphor that I used earlier, linking it in, that cake, once it's passed out in that year, and there's additional places, then that comes out of that cake that's already cut. So we're effectively, there's a better way of using the same funding. So we can effectively growth commission, get the funding boosted in the formula, instead of having to kind of foot the whole bill within the existing cake already. And that is where we see the real benefits, both for NCC and then for the special schools, because we can pass some of that on, and we can justify kind of moving into this model internally and as a high needs block as well. I did say I get stuck on this page, and I do have individual kind of slides in here for each of these four. I just it's important to kind of grasp those 4 elements kind of holistically, and you can see now where this then links into some of the other reviews that are kind of going on. I want to be absolutely crystal clear. It is not that once we move on to an average that every child doesn't then get a funding element or a banding attached. Whatever that banding may be when the banding review comes in, because it's important in this model to be able to peg it back year on year, so that special schools don't then effectively lose out in the longer term. Still be banded, still have an annual review. So we're doing annual reviews at the moment. I've had one, which is fundamentally where we've got different aspects: the council, sort, send, finance, school organisation, having a meeting across the table with a special school to discuss all the different elements that kind of make up the school, make up the numbers of kids, make sure we're on the same page, make sure that we know where the kids are coming from, make sure we know the transport implications of the children, and make sure that we agree on an average top up at that point. It is not that we are dictating this is your average, and that is that. It is very much collaborative, average top-up method being used for the future year. Alongside, I realise I've gone out of sync with my presentation somewhat, but I think we're fine anyway. Alongside this, if you recall the previous schools forum, we had Patrick on board, where he asked about kind of mid-year and what would bespoke funding group do in certain cases if we've had an in-year placement that perhaps has been independent and cost over £100,000 a year. It would be remiss to go, all right, well, that now costs the school £13,000 a year. That is the intention then, to go into the panel review, to create a one-off in-year kind of arrangement, a one-off payment before then the following year, where that can be included in the average and catch up that way. And that is the idea that we're kind of putting forward for the panels to consider, to make sure that we're covering all bases, so that to make sure that all provisions can provide as an average, as a whole, for every child. The other thing that I want to be absolutely crystal clear on, I'll get the timeline in a minute, this is not designed, and in no case does it reduce funding to special schools. It does not take money out of any special school pocket in order to do this. What we're doing is streamlining, helping the process, which will in itself make gains, but also pulling in more funding through the being proactive element rather than reactive, which is as it is at the moment, hence why we're paying out 96 additional places plus additional places in SSBs. We need to I have a feeling we're talking about SEND and 90% deficits and recovery plans. It will be in there, mitigations as to what we're doing already, and making sure that we're being proactive will be a key part of whatever plan the DfE require us to do, to say that we are being proactive in that. I'll just share the timeline here. So this is where we are in the process. We've done the consultation. I'm slightly behind in annual reviews, but I think all bar one are booked in kind of for the next week. And we will kick off. The plan is to kick off and commission and do it through section 251 as of April. So we're not, in some cases we have some of the non-maintained special schools which will work on a slightly different, because they're working on a financial and academic year aligned, whereas our special schools work on kind of separate financial year and academic year. So we will kick off from April in our commissioning in section 251. All schools have had this modelled individually. I have gone to them with a budget spreadsheet and gone, this is your difference, this is what you had, this is your difference. Why is it better than before? It's predictable, fair, simple, future proofing, and supports signals and bridges any gaps. I'll just bring up the consultation just so that we can wrap it all up. Hopefully, I don't want to get that bit in there. Hopefully you can see the kind of positive reaction that we've had from our special schools in amongst these questions. I think you will realise as we go through them kind of why we're coming here as Schools Forum to inform, because of such the strong feeling that we've got from special schools here. There is ultimately unanimity in the decision making through here. So first question, how clear is it? Obviously, proof's in the pudding a little bit. I have been out to special schools and I continue to do so, and the annual review forms part of that. All schools were promised the annual review, so I do understand why there are two partially clear, but at least all are in some way clear in what we've discussed. Why can I not scroll? There we go. To what extent do you agree Model E would improve predictability and stability for the school? All 7 respondents agree or strongly agree. How confident are you that it supports medium-term financial planning? All are at least somewhat confident, and 5 somewhat confident, 2 extremely confident. Do you believe proposed average top-up rates are sufficient on average to meet EHCPs? Now, I think this was a bit of it's a contentious question as it is, because do the current EHCPs in all cases meet financially? I think that's what we're discussing anyway. Financially, what the school needs. We do have two no's within the average for the average question on EHCPs, 3 yeses and 2 unsures. So again, we do have an overall general consensus, but I dare say that's more of a rebellion against the current banding not meeting needs rather than the future banding meeting needs. We'll have, because we've got the pause on the bespoke funding group, and we will take into consideration the other bits of what I'm talking about here and the in-year needs. So we do have 3 no's in terms of will it provide adequate assurance for pupils with exceptional rapidly escalating needs. 3 no's and 1 yes and 3 unsures. That will form part of the panel review and will inform the future decision making then for that and the banding review. And again, you can see why this one comes first and why we've had to do this consultation first, because it's so holistic. It's so it has to then inform the other reviews for the other reviews to be effective. 8, compared with the current funding arrangements, you expect Model E to reduce administrative burden, increase administrative burden, or have no material impact. Most anticipate, and I anticipate, reduced administrative burden. We have special schools working out to the nth degree based on complex payments and plans and dates, exactly what they're due at whichever point. This will cut through a lot of that admin. Again, we'll suck it and see, but I do, as with special schools, expect a reduction in administrative burden. I think the key question in all of this, and the one that I really want to highlight, do you support the introduction of the enhanced funding method? We have all schools, all special schools, all those that responded here in support or in strongly support of introducing the methodology, and all are aware, whether it's September or April, of the deadlines where we'll be introducing it, but that is the real kicker in support of the methodology. Finally, we have some comments at the end, but do you agree that it is a positive step? We have 3 saying yes, 4 unsure. Again, I think once the annual reviews, I'd like to think once the annual reviews are done, and now that I've taken it to here to forum, that we can turn those unsures into yeses, but most importantly, there are no nos. We are positive. We recognise both the council, whether it's our individual service areas on this call, whether it's mainstream schools, SSBs, special schools, that there's a reform here, there's a transformation needed, and it brings us in line, fortunately, I guess, with a lot of what's in the SEND white paper, as it is, which I think it is again positive boost in terms of that we are on the right lines, we are going in the right direction, and we will be asked to demonstrate our mitigations and in that plan, and this will be a cornerstone of doing so. We do have comments which we will go through as part of annual review with each school to make sure that the comments are addressed. And I will again just reinforce that it's not this review in its own, it's a holistic approach to all these reviews, which will kind of come to the positive outcome that we're all hoping for, expecting on all fronts of the rapid review. Can I pass back to Alan?
Thank you very much, Callum. I'm conscious that we are slightly over our time, but was any questions about Callum's presentation?
I will say that I will circulate. I do have a business plan formal paper in front of me. Now that we've presented the consultation, I will send that round to forum members alongside some of the other things from today, just to give some of the integral detail and kind of get it on black and white for everybody here.
That's great. Thanks, Callum. What I'd suggest, given the time, that it might be worthwhile putting this on as any feedback on this as an item on the High Needs Committee in May meeting, so that people have got a chance to digest, and people who have had to leave the meeting before now have got a chance to feedback on the proposals. David?
Just to say that obviously this is the working group that's sort of the most progressed, but I think the model that you can see in terms of coming up with some proposals, meeting closely with those that are directly involved, consulting with them, reviewing their viewpoints following the consultation, is a methodology that we'll use for the panels and the banding and the central team's work as well, which is imminent.
Okay, thank you very much, David. Okay, thank you, colleagues, for everyone's contributions today and for going slightly over. And hopefully we'll see as many of you for a face-to-face meeting on the 1st of July at County Hall. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Alan. Thank you.